1. The chains beneath the suns, beneath the twin suns of Tatooine. The air trembles with heat, and the ground swallows sound. The dunes stretch without mercy, a sea of gold where no wind brings comfort, and the horizon never draws closer. Here, life is not lived, it is endured. Every grain of sand bears the weight of centuries, carrying whispers of caravans lost, of bones swallowed whole, of ancient battles erased by the storms. The Force lingers here, not as a river, but as a slow, heavy breath that sleeps beneath the dust. It knows the boy before he knows himself. He runs barefoot through the market, the sand biting his skin, the shouts of traders sharp as blades. Metal glints in the sun, droid parts, scrap holes, rusted weapons. Each thing has passed through many hands, each hand wearing the same brand, survival. The boy moves quickly, not because he is hunted, but because the world will crush the slow. His name is Anakin Skywalker, though here, names mean little. What matters is who owns you, and he is owned. The shackle on his leg is not heavy, but it is unbreakable. It hums with a silent promise that if he runs, it will end him before the sun set. He does not think of escape, he thinks of flying. The sky is a canvas he has never touched, yet he feels it in his bones. In the shadow of his master's shop, he builds small machines from discarded fragments. They work not because they should, but because he wills them to. The Force, though unnamed, bends in his hands like metal beneath heat at night. When the market sleeps and the moons draw silver lines across the sand, he dreams. In his dreams, there is no desert. There are oceans, forests, towers of crystal, ships like great birds soaring between the stars. In his dreams, his mother's hands are not cracked by labor, her eyes not dulled by exhaustion. Dreams are the only place where chains cannot follow, but morning always comes, and morning always returns him to the sand. The holocron speaks now, though its voice is neither loud nor near. All destinies are born in shadow, but the deepest shadows come from light unshaped. Anakin does not hear it, not yet, but the Force hears itself in him, a low, dangerous echo. Watto, his master, counts credits by lamplight. To Watto, the boy is property, a tool no different than a hydrospanner, though far more useful. To the traders, he is a curiosity, the child who can fix anything, the slave who wins races and machines that kill grown men. They speak of him with the same tone they speak of rare animals, admired and caged. Anakin does not see himself as caged. He is too young to know what freedom truly means. But he knows what it means to not have choice, not to have his father, not to have the right to keep the people he loves. His mother smiles at him in the mornings, hides her sorrow in her work, and tells him the suns will rise again tomorrow. He believes her because he must. One day, in the far-off years, he will remember the sound of those markets, the buzz of alien voices, the rattle of chains, the hiss of Jawa traders, the dry creak of tents in the wind, and they will not comfort him, they will haunt him. For every empire he will one day walk through, every starship he will command, will still feel like Tatooine if the chains remain in his mind. The Force has placed him here as a seed is placed in the deepest soil, not for safety, but for change. Yet seeds that grow in harshness must grow strong, and in growing strong they may twist. Already his heart begins to divide. One half reaches for the sky, the other clings to the ground where his mother stands. This division will never heal. It is said that the Chosen One would bring balance to the Force, but the holocron sighs, a long and ancient exhale. Balance is not peace. It is the stillness of a blade before the strike. The galaxy does not yet see the blade it is forging. On the eve of the Boonta Eve Classic, Anakin stands in the hangar beside the pod he has built. It is not perfect. Nothing born in slavery is, but it is his. He touches the hull as though it were alive, as though it might carry him not through the race, but away from the world entirely. His mother watches from the shadows, her hands folded, her eyes filled with 1,000 unspoken prayers. That night, the stars sing closer. He lies awake, staring at them, feeling something vast stir within him. It is not hope. Hope is small. This is something older, a calling, a promise, a danger. The Force does not speak in words, but in weight, and tonight it weighs upon him like never before. Tomorrow will bring strangers from beyond the sands. Tomorrow will bring the first step toward a destiny no one can yet see clearly. Tomorrow the boy in chains will take to the sky, and the holocron whispers, "From the dust shall rise the storm, and in its heart the galaxy will tremble." To the eyes of the seer far, beyond the desert, the city world of Coruscant glitters under an endless night. Towers rise like blades toward the stars, each lit window a fragment of power. In the Jedi Temple, the air is still, yet the Force moves in quiet. Currents, bringing whispers from the farthest edges of the galaxy. The Council meditates, seeing patterns in the dark, threads of fate woven through light and shadow alike. They do not yet know the shape of the storm. In the outer rim, events stir. The blockade of Naboo forces a detour for Jedi Master Qui-Gon, Jin and his apprentice, Obi-Wan Kenobi. What begins as a mission of negotiation turns into an escape. Their path thrown into chaos by the will of the Force, damaged and seeking repairs. They descend upon Tatooine, not by choice, but by design, unseen. The Force does not reveal its plans in full. It places its pieces where they must be, even when the players do not understand the board. In the market of Mos Espa, where the heat clings like a second skin, Qui-Gon sees the boy for the first time. There is nothing grand in the meeting, no music of prophecy, no fire from the heavens. Only a child with clear eyes, speaking with ease to strangers, offering to help in exchange for nothing more than a chance to race. But when Qui-Gon looks into those eyes, he feels it, the presence, not the flicker of the Force found in many, but a blaze that burns with impossible strength. It is not potential, it is certainty. The Jedi Master studies him quietly. The boy speaks of speed, of ships, of the stars, as though they are calling him. Qui-Gon listens, sensing the current beneath. The words, "The Force is heavy here," wrapping itself around this child like an unbreakable thread. The boy does not feel it. He only knows the desert, the shop, the racers, but the Force knows him. The pod race is announced. Qui-Gon sees in it an opening, not only to win the parts needed for his own mission, but to test the boy's spirit. The danger is immense. Most who enter the race do not return whole, yet the boy shows no fear. He speaks as if the outcome is already written in his mind. This is not arrogance, it is conviction, though its source is hidden even from him. The day of the race is a storm of sound and sand. Engines roar like beasts, the crowd chants, and the suns beat mercilessly overhead. Qui-Gon watches from the sidelines, his gaze fixed not on the other racers, but on Anakin alone. The boy moves as if the machine is part of him, reacting before danger fully arrives, turning near disaster into victory with impossible precision. The Force flows through him not in discipline, but in instinct. When the race ends, The crowd erupts. The boy has won. To most, it is a spectacle. To Qui, it is confirmation. This is no ordinary child. This is the shape of prophecy. In the shadows of the stands, the holocron's voice hums like a warning. Power untempered is power in waiting. Waiting for purpose. Waiting for claim. Qui-Gon takes the prize not for himself, but to buy the boy's freedom. Watto resists, but fate bends through chance and gamble, and the chain on Anakin's leg is broken. It is the first time he feels the air without the weight of ownership. Yet freedom is not whole. His mother remains in the shop, her chains unbroken. The moment is victory and loss bound together. The boy hides the hurt, but Qui-Gon sees it. The Jedi Master says nothing. They leave Tatooine in a ship that hums with strange destiny. Anakin stands at the viewport, watching the desert shrink into nothing. He does not yet know that every step forward will take him further from the world that held him. He does not yet know that some chains do not break when metal is cut. On the journey, Qui-Gon speaks with him of the Jedi, of the Temple, of the ways of the Force. Anakin listens with wide eyes, though the words are foreign to him. The Force, to him, has always been feeling a pull, a push, a quiet voice in the back of the mind. The thought of it as an order, a path with rules, is strange. But the idea of belonging to something greater than himself takes root. Upon arrival at Coruscant, the Jedi Temple rises before him like a mountain of stone and light. It is older than empires, older than many of the stars he has seen. Within its walls, the council awaits. The Master's eyes study him as Qui-Gon tells of the prophecy, the one who will bring balance to the Force. Some faces tighten, others remain unreadable. They test him, asking questions of fear and feeling. The boy answers honestly, but honestly is not always safely. When they sense his fear for his mother, they see danger. When they measure his potential, they see threat. They tell Qui-Gon the boy must not be trained. Qui-Gon does not yield. He believes the Force brought him to Tatooine for this child alone. The Council's refusal is the first fracture between them. Anakin does not understand the words exchanged, but he feels the weight in the room, the unspoken currents moving beneath the surface. That night, the holocron's whisper deepens. The seer's gift is sight, but sight is not wisdom. For what is seen can be misread, and the clearest vision may lead to the darkest path. In the chambers of the Jedi Temple, the boy sleeps beneath. The watch of statues carved in the likeness of warriors long turned to dust. The stars above Coruscant shine coldly, far removed from the suns of his home. The Force stirs in his dreams, not with comfort, but with the restless promise that change has begun. 3. The Temple of Silent Watchers, the Jedi Temple rose from the heart of Coruscant, like a fortress carved from the bones of a dead god. Its towers pierced the endless sky, each spire crowned with silent guardians who had seen centuries pass. Anakin walked through its gates with steps that tried to be steady, yet the weight of the place pressed against him. The walls seemed to hum, not with sound, but with the memory of every voice that had spoken the code within them. The Force was thick here, a river of presence flowing through every stone. In the great hall, statues lined the path, ancient masters whose names he did not yet know. Their stone eyes followed him without moving, their faces carved into masks of calm. But calm, he would learn, was not always peace. Some had fought in wars so old their enemies no longer had names. Some had sworn vows that had broken empires. The temple remembered them all. His days began before the suns could rise anywhere in the galaxy. training halls filled with the hum of practice sabers, the air sharp with the scent of heated metal. He learned to move as the masters taught, but his movements were not born from stillness. They came from instinct, from the same fire that had carried him through the pod race. The masters praised his skill, yet they frowned when they felt the heat beneath it. In the libraries, he walked among shelves that stretched beyond sight. Holocrons floated in stasis, each containing voices of the dead. He reached for them once, but the archivist's hand stopped him. Some knowledge was not for the young. He wondered why knowledge could be dangerous if it came from the light. The question stayed in his mind. Other Padawans trained alongside him. Some greeted him with caution, others with polite distance. They had grown up in the temple, their lives wrapped in the teachings since birth. He was an outsider, shaped by dust and survival, and though they smiled, he could feel the space they kept between themselves and him. The Force moved differently here. On Tatooine, it had been a whisper in the wind, a push in the moment of danger. In the temple, it was a constant presence, filling every breath, shaping every thought. It was discipline, structure, tradition. But in him, it still surged wild. When he meditated, he could not still his mind. The images came unbidden, his mother's face, the roar of engines, the taste of desert air. The masters told him to let them pass. He could not. In the silent gardens, beneath trees older than the Republic itself, he sometimes thought he heard another voice in the Force. It was faint, colder than the temple's warmth, as if calling from a place far away. He did not speak of it. The Jedi taught that the dark side whispered in many forms, and though he was curious, he feared what they might see in his curiosity. Master Yoda watched him often, saying little. The old master's eyes held both kindness and warning, as if he could already see the roads that lay ahead. Obi-Wan, now his teacher, was patient but firm. He spoke of rules, of focus, of the dangers of attachment. Anakin nodded, but his heart still turned toward the one attachment he had never released. In the training halls, he excelled. In the meditation rooms, he struggled. In the council chambers, he listened to debates of worlds and wars he barely understood. The temple was vast, yet at times it felt like a cage of stone and light. Freedom was not as simple as the breaking of chains. The holocron's voice came to him in the quiet between lessons. The stillest water hides the deepest depth, and what lies beneath will rise when the surface is broken. Anakin did not know if the words were dream or waking thought, but he felt them settle into him like seeds. Sometimes he wandered to the highest balconies at night. The city stretched below like a sea of stars. Ships moved between towers like slow comets, and the air was filled with the distant hum of engines. From here, the galaxy seemed infinite, yet he knew he was still far from the places in his dreams. The temple's watchers stood in shadowed alcoves, carved in the likeness of long-dead protectors. Their faces seemed to change in the shifting light, sometimes stern, sometimes sorrowful. He wondered if they had all obeyed the code, or if some had once broken it. He wondered what price they had paid. On one such night, he felt that faint, cold presence again. It did not speak. It only lingered, as if observing him. When he turned to look, there was nothing there but the statues. The air was still, yet the feeling did not fade. His lessons deepened. The masters spoke of balance, of light and dark as two parts of a whole. But they also spoke of the Sith as enemies beyond redemption. He thought of balance as a thing that could not exist without both halves. The thought troubled him, for the Teachings spoke of destroying the darkness entirely. If it were gone, what would balance mean? He kept the questions silent. In the archives, he once passed by a sealed chamber. Its door was marked with warnings in languages he could not read. He felt a pull toward it, as though something inside knew his name. A temple guard stopped him, and the moment passed. But the feeling remained. The seasons on Coruscant did not change. The city was always in motion, always alive, but the temple stood unmoved, timeless. In its stillness, Anakin grew in skill, in strength, in questions he could not voice. The galaxy beyond seemed distant, yet he knew it was waiting. And somewhere in that galaxy, the future was already moving toward him. The holocron whispered once more before sleep. A vessel to full will shatter before it bends. For the wound of parting the galaxy beyond the temple stirred with unease. Trade routes shifted under political pressure, and whispers of war moved through the Senate's marbled halls. But Anakin's unrest was not born of politics. It came from dreams. In the still hours of night, visions crept into his mind unbidden. His mother's voice called to him from a place he could not see, her hands trembling, her breath shallow. The desert stretched behind her, endless and suffocating. No matter how far he reached, he could not close the space between them. He woke with his heart pounding, the image burned into him. He did not tell the council, he knew their words before. They could speak them. Attachment is forbidden, the past must be released, the living force guides all. But no teaching could erase the bond between mother and child. It was not a chain of metal, but of blood, and blood does not break. Days in the temple passed with lessons and training, but the dreams followed him into waking thought. In the training halls, his blade moved with perfect precision, yet his mind wandered to the sands. In meditation, the silence was filled with her voice. The masters noticed his distraction, but they mistook it for youthful impatience. Only Obi-Wan saw the depth of it, though he did not speak. Anakin had thought freedom was the shattering of chains, but he learned now that freedom could be hollow. His body was free, yet part of him was still in that shop, still under the twin suns, still hearing the hum of engines and the clink of a master's tools. He had left Tatooine, but it had not left him. The holocron's voice reached him in a whisper between breaths. A wound unseen will bleed the longest, and in bleeding it will feed the dark. Assignments took him across the galaxy. He saw worlds of ice and glass, cities built on oceans, moons carved into fortresses, yet none of it silenced the call of the desert in his dreams. In moments of quiet, his thoughts returned to her, to the question of whether she was safe, whether she thought of him. The Jedi Code said such ties led to fear, and fear to the dark side. But he did not see fear as weakness. To him, it was proof of care. He began to ask questions in subtle ways, inquiries about Tatooine through smugglers, glances at traders who had crossed the outer rim. Information came in fragments, most of it meaningless. Yet each rumor of slavers, each mention of harsh seasons, deepened the unease in him. On a mission far from Coruscant, he saw a child taken from her family in payment for a debt. The mother's cries broke something in him. He turned away before the others could see the fire in his eyes. That night, he dreamt again of his mother, but this time her face was shadowed, and her voice weak. He woke, knowing the dreams were no longer only dreams. The council taught that visions could mislead, that the future was in motion and not to be trusted. But Anakin felt the truth in his bones. Something was happening to her. The thought hollowed his focus, turning duty into distraction. His victories on missions came swifter, harsher. The discipline of the Jedi began to feel like a barrier between him and what truly mattered. He considered asking permission to return, but he already knew the answer. Attachment was forbidden. To go to her would be to place personal desire above the will of the Order. The Jedi would not understand that for him. This was not desire. It was survival of the heart. The holocron whispered again, "Love is the chain that does not rust, but when it is pulled, it cuts the flesh." Obi-Wan noticed the tightening in his manner, the way his patience frayed more easily. He warned Anakin to let go of what he feared to lose. Anakin nodded, but the words felt like asking him to let go of himself. When war began to stir openly and the Jedi became generals, Anakin's time was claimed by strategy and battle. Yet even among fleets and sieges, his thoughts could not be contained. The wound in his heart remained open, invisible to all but himself. It bled quietly, feeding something within that neither the Council nor he himself could name. He told himself that one day he would return to her, not to break the code, but to see her safe. The thought became a promise, and the promise became a weight. Every passing day without her made that weight heavier, bending him toward a choice the Jedi could not foresee. In the temple gardens, he once stood beneath the silent gaze of an ancient statue. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying with it a faint scent of desert air that could not exist on Coruscant. It was only memory, but it struck him like prophecy. He did not know then that the wound would soon be torn open beyond healing. 5. The War of 1,000 Shadows. The galaxy broke open like a wound, and from it poured war. What began with whispers of secession became fleets of steel crossing the stars, banners raised in defiance against the Republic. Planets that had long hidden their discontent now declared allegiance to the separatist cause, and the Jedi Guardians of Peace were drawn into a role they had sworn never to take, that of generals. The first battles were swift and brutal. Armies of droids, tireless and unfeeling, surged across worlds. The Republic responded with clone legions bred for obedience. For the first time in generations, the Force itself seemed to tremble beneath the weight of such conflict. Anakin took to the war as if born for it. In the chaos of battle, he found clarity. His blade became the answer to every question. His commands carried the certainty that the Council often lacked. Clones followed him without hesitation, and victories came in rapid succession. Yet each triumph was shadowed by something unseen, a dark undercurrent beneath the roar of war. The holocron's voice seeped into his thoughts. War is the crucible of the soul. It burns away mercy, leaving only will. Anakin's skill on the battlefield made him a hero among soldiers, but to the Council it was a concern. They saw the recklessness, the way he pushed himself beyond caution, the way he viewed war as a means to an end rather than a burden to endure. But they needed him. The Republic needed him, and so they did not stop him. The Separatists struck, not only with fleets and armies, but with shadows. Assassins moved in the dark, agents whispered in the Senate halls, and worlds fell not by siege, but by treachery. Anakin began to see the galaxy as a place where trust was a fragile thing, easily shattered. His faith in the Order's diplomacy weakened with each betrayal. Between battles, he searched for news of Tatooine, of his mother. The war made it harder. Communications were intercepted, travel was dangerous, but the dreams had not ceased. If anything, they grew sharper flashes of her in pain calling to him. The thought gnawed at him, even as he led armies to victory. Obi-Wan warned him that war had a way of making every loss personal. But for Anakin, this was not war's trick. This was truth. Every world he saved was another reminder of the one he had left behind. The galaxy was caught in a game whose rules were hidden. The Separatists struck where they were least expected, and the Republic answered in kind. Anakin began to see patterns, movements, and counter-movements, each step bringing both sides deeper into the abyss. Somewhere beyond the front lines, someone was guiding it all. The holocron's voice deepened. 2 hands moved the galaxy toward darkness. One you can see, one you cannot. Anakin did not yet know the name of the second hand, but he felt it. A presence moving behind the veil of the Force, watching. At times in battle, when his rage burned hottest, he thought he heard it. A faint voice, promising strength, whispering of power unbound by Jedi restraint. The Council spoke of the war as a necessity, a means to preserve the Republic. But to Anakin, it was becoming something else. A storm that would never end unless someone shattered it at its heart. He began to think not of defending worlds, but of ending the war by striking at those who fed it. His victories grew bloodier. He no longer waited for the enemy to strike. He brought the battle to them. Cities burned, strongholds fell, and the line between justice and vengeance blurred. The soldiers called him fearless. The Council called him dangerous. He began to believe both were true. In the dead of night, between campaigns, Anakin stood alone aboard his ship, staring into the endless black of hyperspace. The stars blurred, and for a moment he saw not the galaxy, but a great wheel turning, grinding civilizations beneath it. At its center, a shadow waited, patient and cold. He did not know it yet, but that shadow had been watching him since he was a boy. The war did not slow. It spread like fire through dry grass. Entire sectors became graveyards of ships, their hulks drifting silent in the void. The Force was heavy with the dead. Anakin carried their weight, though he did not speak of it. He carried it alongside the weight of the dreams. And then, in the midst of this unending tide of battle, a message came. It was simple, almost careless news from the Outer Rim. A name, a location. His mother had been taken. The wound in him, long kept under control, tore wide open. The war of 1,000 shadows became, for him, a war of one truth. He could no longer wait. The holocron's whisper was almost a sigh. Every battle hides another, and the one within you will decide the fate of all others. Chapter 6. The web of the Chancellor of the Republic, was a master of appearances. In the Senate, his voice carried the warmth of reason and the promise of peace. In private, however, his words were a carefully woven net, spun to entangle the mind of a young Jedi Knight. Anakin Skywalker, already a hero of the Clone Wars, was the perfect prey, ambitious, restless, and secretly longing for more than the Jedi Code would allow. Palpatine's approach was never forceful. He offered friendship instead of authority, understanding instead of judgment. To a young man who had been lectured by the Council for years, this difference was intoxicating. Palpatine began with praise. Always subtle, always targeted. He would speak of Anakin's skill in battle, of his unique instincts, of his unmatched connection to the Force. "You are the most gifted Jedi I have ever met," he would say, his tone as if stating a fact rather than offering flattery. Anakin tried to be humble, but the truth was that the words fed something deep inside him, a need the Jedi had never satisfied. The Council had taught him discipline, but they had never celebrated him. Palpatine did, and celebration felt better. Then discipline. Then came the confidences. In hushed tones, the Chancellor would share matters of state that even the Council was not told. Military plans, political secrets, the movements of the separatist leaders. Each revelation was another thread in the web, binding Anakin tighter to him. The message was unspoken but clear. I trust you more than anyone. And in Anakin's mind, trust demanded loyalty. Palpatine knew how to draw him further. He began to speak of the Force in ways that defied the Jedi Code. He told stories of ancient knowledge, powers the Jedi feared because they could not control them, powers to heal wounds that should not heal, powers to prevent death itself. Anakin listened, his heart pounding. To any other Jedi, these tales would have been dismissed as Sith legend, dangerous lies meant to seduce the unwary. But to Anakin, they were possibility. They were hope. In the dim corridors of the Chancellor's private chambers, Palpatine told the story that sealed Anakin's curiosity. A Sith legend, he called it, the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. This Dark Lord, Palpatine said, had been so powerful in the Force that he could stop people from dying. He could create life from the midichlorians themselves, but his apprentice killed him in his sleep. He could save others from death, the Chancellor murmured, but not himself. The tale lingered in Anakin's mind like a shadow on glass. He did not know if it was true. He did not care. The possibility was enough. For an Anakin heart, there was still a wound that had never healed. His mother's death had burned into him a terror of loss that no Jedi meditation could calm. And now, in quiet moments, another fear had begun to take root. The fear of losing Podmum. She was his anchor, his secret joy, his forbidden love. She was also the one person whose death he could not imagine surviving. The Chancellor's story was not just a story, it was an answer. The Jedi Code forbade attachment, claiming it led to suffering. But what the Jedi called attachment, Anakin called love, and love was worth any risk. The Chancellor seemed to agree. He never condemned Anakin for his feelings. He never told him to let go. Instead, he spoke as if love was a strength, not a weakness. Every word was a counterpoint to the Jedi's teachings, and every word made Anakin question the Council's wisdom. Palpatine's influence deepened with each meeting. Sometimes it was direct, a conversation in the Chancellor's office, a whispered exchange in a Senate corridor. Sometimes it was indirect, a small gift, a gesture of trust, a reminder that Anakin's voice mattered. These gestures seemed harmless, even kind, but together they were a chain, each link forged in secrecy. By the time the Council began to suspect the Chancellor's intentions, it was already too late. Anakin had come to see Palpatine, not just as a political leader, but as a mentor. In the Chancellor's presence, Anakin felt understood in a way the Jedi never made him feel. Here was a man who believed in him without reservation, who offered him the very thing he craved most: control over destiny. The Sith holocron's voice would have warned him, had he been listening. The trap is sweetest before it springs. But Anakin was not listening. He was already entangled. Palpatine did not yet pull the snare tight that would come later. For now, he only tightened it enough to ensure there was no escape. What Anakin could not see was that every praise, every secret, every whispered story was calculated. Palpatine's friendship was not friendship at all, but a weapon. And Anakin himself was not the hunter he imagined, he was the prey. The galaxy would soon feel the weight of this truth. But for now, the Chancellor smiled, the net was nearly closed, and the young Jedi did not yet know he had already been caught. Chapter 7. The night visions Anakin Skywalker slept little. In those days, the galaxy was at war, and even when he lay down in the quiet of Coruscant's night, his mind did not rest. The sounds of starfighter engines, the screams of soldiers lost in battle, the tension of missions yet to come, all of it followed him into the darkness behind his eyes. But then the dreams began to change. They were no longer about war. They became personal. They became about her, Padme Amidala. The one secret in his life the Jedi could never discover appeared to him in visions more vivid than memory. She was radiant at first, smiling, her hand on her swelling belly. They had spoken of this moment in hushed whispers, of the life they had created together. But the vision never stayed in that moment of joy. It always shifted. Her smile would fade, her breath would shorten, her hands would clutch at nothing, and her eyes would widen in fear. Then the light would leave them, and Anakin would awaken drenched in sweat, heart pounding as though he had run for miles. He had seen death before. He had felt it in the Force, smelled it in the sand when his mother died in his arms. The pain of that day had carved a wound so deep it never truly healed. Now, seeing Padme's death feeling, it was like tearing that wound open again. It was the same helplessness, the same crushing realization that all his power meant nothing if he could not save the ones he loved at first. He tried to tell himself it was only a dream, a trick of a tired mind. But the Force did not give him simple dreams. When visions came with such clarity, they were warnings. The Jedi taught that the future was always in motion, that to cling to such visions was dangerous. Yet the Jedi had told him the same thing about his mother, and they had been wrong. They had told him to let go, to accept the will of the Force, and because he listened, he had lost her. He would not make the same mistake again. Padme noticed his restlessness. She would touch his arm, ask softly if something was troubling him. Anakin would only smile, kiss her forehead, and say it was nothing. How could he tell her? How could he speak of death without planting fear in her heart? He would bear it alone, as he bore so many burdens. But each night the visions returned, and each morning his fear grew. The Jedi Council sensed his unease. Masters like Yoda counseled patience, warning him that fear of loss was the path to the dark side. "Train yourself to let go," Yoda said, as if those words could untie the knots in his heart. Anakin nodded out of respect, but inside he was boiling. To let go was to abandon her. To accept her death was to betray the very reason he fought. The Jedi spoke of detachment as if it was strength, but to him it was weakness. In this storm of doubt, Chancellor Palpatine's voice became a lifeline. The Chancellor listened without judgment, without the cold sermons of the Jedi. He spoke not of letting go, but of holding on. He told Anakin that the Jedi feared the power that could truly save those he loved. He spoke of ancient knowledge, of abilities the Order had deemed too dangerous because they threatened the Council's control. One evening, in a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke of a Sith legend, the tragedy of Darth Plagueis. The wise dot, it was said, Plagueis had the power to prevent death itself. He could create life, sustain it, bend the Force to his will in ways the Jedi would never teach. But his apprentice had betrayed him in his sleep, ending his life before the secret could be shared. Palpatine's eyes had gleamed as he said it. Such knowledge is possible. Not through the Jedi, but it is possible. Anakin's mind latched onto the idea like a drowning man clinging to driftwood. The possibility of saving Padme, of stopping the visions from becoming real big, became all that mattered. It was no longer about philosophy or allegiance. It was about her life, the more he thought about it, the more the Jedi seemed like an obstacle rather than allies. They would never allow him to pursue such knowledge. They would rather see her die than break their code. And so he began to keep more from them, not just his marriage, but his thoughts, his fears, his anger. A wall began to grow between him and the Order, and on the other side of that wall was the Chancellor, always ready with a sympathetic ear. The holocron's voice would later recall this time as the weaving of the final thread. Love, it murmured, is the chain the dark side forges strongest. Through it, the will to protect becomes the will to control, and control is the first step into shadow. Each night, the visions sharpened. He saw Pam on a birthing table, her body arching in pain, her screams echoing in his skull. He saw his hands reaching for her, but failing to touch. He saw her whispering his name with her last breath. He would jolt awake, gasping. The image of her lifeless body burned into his mind. Sometimes he swore he could still feel the coldness of her skin in his palm by day. He threw himself into missions, fighting harder, flying faster, as though victory in battle could erase the dread. But even in the cockpit, the shadow of the dream lingered. Every hyperspace jump, every laser blast, every lightsaber clash, none of it mattered compared to the single truth gnawing at him: Padma was going to die, unless he found a way to stop. It began to see signs everywhere. If she coughed, his heart skipped. If she looked tired, he panicked. Even her smiles seemed tinged with the knowledge that something dark was waiting for them. Yet he said nothing. To speak it aloud felt like inviting the prophecy to come true. The Jedi still counseled patience. The Chancellor still whispered of power. And between those two worlds, Anakin stood, pulled in opposite directions, but leaning ever so slightly toward the one that promised action over inaction. For the first time, he began to believe that perhaps the Jedi were not meant to save Padma. Perhaps it was meant to be him alone. And if the dark side held the key, then so be it. The holocron's whisper deepened here, almost mournful. Who fears the loss of love is already lost. For love will fade, but fear will remain, and fear will always seek a master. Chapter 8. The Blade in the Council. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant rose high above the city. Its towers piercing the clouds, its halls lined with statues of ancient masters. To outsiders, it was a place of serenity and wisdom. But to Anakin Skywalker, in those days, it had begun to feel like a fortress not to protect the galaxy, but to keep him contained. The walls no longer offered comfort. They pressed in on him, silent and watchful. War had changed the Jedi. Meetings of the Council were no longer calm debates on philosophy, but tense briefings on military strategy. Clones marched through the halls, and the scent of ozone from blaster fire lingered on their armor. Every victory came at a cost, and the line between peacekeepers and soldiers grew thinner with each campaign. Anakin could feel the weight of it pressing on every master, though few admitted it aloud. Then came the summons. The Council called him to the High Chamber, its great windows casting daylight across the circle of seats. Masters Yoda, Windu, and the others regarded him with the measured gazes of those who spoke for the Order. Skywalker, Windu began, his voice firm, the Chancellor trusts you above all others. He has requested you serve as his personal representative on the Council. For a moment, Anakin felt pride stir in his chest. The Council, the highest circle of Jedi authority, had never extended such an offer to one so young. But the pride faltered when the next words came. You will sit on this council, Windu continued, but you will not be granted the rank of master. The words hit harder than any blow. Anakin's eyes narrowed, his jaw tensed. What? His voice carried. More than surprised, carried the sting of insult. To be on the council without the rank was unheard of. It was a statement, a deliberate reminder of his place. It is the decision of the council, Windu said, unmoved. Anakin's anger flared. He could feel it boiling beneath the surface, and the holocron's whisper in later years would describe it as a fracture forming in the crystal of his loyalty. In that moment, he saw the council not as mentors, but as jailers, keeping him in check, denying him the recognition his power deserved. He bowed because to refuse would be open defiance. But the words burned in his throat. The days that followed only deepened the rift. While he sat in council meetings, he listened to discussions on the war, but his mind was elsewhere. The Chancellor began to confide in him more openly, speaking of the council's mistrust, of how they were plotting to remove him from power after the war. Palpatine's voice was calm, almost regretful, but every word was chosen to plant seeds of doubt. Then the council made their true request. Windu called him aside after a meeting. The Chancellor has stayed in office long after his term expired. We need to know his intentions. You will report to us anything unusual, anything that might indicate he will not surrender emergency powers. Anakin stared at him. You want me to spy on the Chancellor? The war is nearly won, Windu replied. If he does not relinquish power, democracy itself is at risk. Anakin's thoughts churned. They were asking him to betray the man who had guided him, defended him, praised him when the council doubted him. And they did it without shame. For all their talk of the Jedi Code, here they were, using deception against their own ally. He gave a slow nod, but inside, the choice was already made. His loyalty to the Chancellor would not break so easily. The holocron would later remark that this was the Council's greatest mistake. By placing him between themselves and Palpatine, they turned him into a double-edged blade on the hilt, was no longer in their hands. The tension grew with every passing day. Reports from the Outer Rim told of the war nearing its climax. General Grievous had fled to the distant world of Utapau, and the Council prepared for the final strike. Windu declared that Obi-Wan Kenobi would lead the mission. Anakin accepted it outwardly, but inside, the decision stung. He had wanted the assignment, wanted to prove himself the one to end the war. Instead, the Council kept him in the temple, watching him like a prisoner. He found himself spending more time in the Chancellor's office. Palpatine's words dripped like honey, soothing his anger but guiding it toward a single conclusion. The Jedi were not to be trusted. They feared his power. They feared what he could become. Then came the moment that would shatter the last illusions. In a quiet meeting, Palpatine leaned closer and spoke the words that made the air in the room feel heavy. Anakin, you know, the dark side of the Force. Anakin's eyes narrowed, suspicion flashing, but Palpatine's voice remained calm. I can feel your anger. I can sense your fear. And I know why you have it. You seek the power to save her. I can help you. It was then Palpatine revealed himself, not as a politician, but as a Sith Lord. Darth Sidious, the master of the darkness the Jedi had fought for centuries. Anakin's pulse thundered in his ears. Every instinct told him to ignite his blade. But another voice quieter, deeper asked if perhaps this was the path the visions had been pointing him toward all along. Palpatine's words were a poison Anakin could not spit out. Only through me can you achieve a power greater than any Jedi. Only through me can you save Padme from death. Anakin left the meeting torn in two. He walked the temple halls with a storm inside him, knowing that to tell the council would be to destroy his only chance of saving her. Yet to remain silent was to protect a Sith. The walls seemed to close tighter around him, and the air felt heavier with every breath. The holocron's voice in the dark would later call this the sharpening of the blade. They thought him theirs. Still, it whispered, but a blade honed in distrust will cut the hand that holds it. By the time the call came that Windu was moving to arrest the Chancellor, the blade was ready. The only question left was which way it would swing. Chapter 9. The breaking of the sky. The veil that has long concealed the Chancellor's true nature tears at last. And beneath it lies not the smiling guardian of the Republic, but the face of Darth Sidious, Dark Lord of the Sith. For years he has moved like a phantom through the corridors of power, pulling threads no eye could see. Now the mask falls, and with it the Republic's final illusions. The galaxy's sky fractures in the span of a single day. In the deep chambers of the Senate and the high towers of the Jedi Temple, events erupt like sudden storms. Blades ignite. In secret halls, friends turn to enemies, and allies reveal themselves as executioners. The fire that will consume the galaxy is lit in silence, for no one yet understands the scope of what is being unmade. Anakin Skywalker, once the gifted child from Tatooine, now stands at the edge of his life's final choice. Every vision of Padme's death haunts him like a chain, pulling him toward shadow. He has seen her breath falter in his dreams, has felt her warmth slip from his grasp in the realm between waking and sleep. And Sidious, with a serpent's voice, promises that the power to prevent this fate lies only in the dark side. The Jedi, Sidious whispers, will never grant him what he seeks. They will betray him, take his child, and cast him aside. Each word sinks deeper, lodging in places where fear already festers. The duel in the Chancellor's chamber is a collision of destinies. Masters of the Jedi Order come to end the Sith. Threats once and for all, yet the battle is decided before the last stroke falls. Sidious strikes with a fury no mortal age can measure, his face twisting into something neither human nor entirely alive. The Force itself seems to recoil from him, yet its currents flow to his will. Blades clash, and the air smells of burning, metal and scorched stone. In the moment that decides all, Anakin's blade turns not against the Sith, but against the Jedi. The cut is swift, the betrayal silent but absolute. With that single act, he severs himself from the light. The boy who once dreamed beneath Tatooine's twin suns breathes his last in that instant, not with a scream, but with the quiet surrender of one who has accepted his doom. Sidious names him anew. You shall be known as Darth Vader. The name falls like an iron shackle over Anakin's soul. It is not a title, but a sentence. In this christening there is no joy, no pride, only the cold finality of transformation. The man who kneels is not the same as the one who rose that morning. This is a creature reborn in shadow, molded by fear, sealed by oath. Vader accepts his master's command, as if bound by the Force itself, though in truth it is his own desire. The desire to save Padme at any cost, that chains him more tightly than any bond of the Sith. The temple burns before the next dawn. The night sky over Coruscant glows red, as if reflecting the death of the Order itself. Younglings hide in the halls they once thought sacred, only to meet the blade of the one they once called protector. The council chamber, once the heart of the Jedi, lies strewn with the fallen. From the lower spires to the highest towers, the slaughter is complete. The city planet that has never slept now dreams of fire. Somewhere in the vastness of the Force, a wound opens that will never fully close. When Sidious declares himself Emperor, there is no voice loud enough to oppose him. The senators who survive the night bow their heads. The clone armies stand ready to enforce the new decree. Across the galaxy, the war ends in an instant, not in victory, but in submission. The Republic is dead, its corpse worn as the mask of the Empire. Anakin does not see this as loss, but as necessity. The Jedi are gone, the Separatists are shattered, and now only one task remains, to ensure Podmeth's survival. Each step he takes away from the temple, from the city, from the stars, is guided by that single purpose. Yet in the currents of the Force, something ancient stirs a whisper that the path he has chosen will not save her, but destroy them both. He cannot hear it through the roar of his new master's voice. The galaxy watches the breaking of its own sky. Those who see it weep. Those who survive it speak of the day when light itself was struck down. In hidden places, whispers begin of prophecies misunderstood, of the chosen one lost to darkness. The holocron's voice, cold and eternal, lingers over this chapter of history. The brightest star falls not in battle, but in silence, and when it falls, it drags the sky with it. Chapter 10, The Purge of the Light. It began with a whisper, carried through hidden channels to every clone commander in the galaxy. The words were simple, yet they shattered the order that had stood for 1,000 generations. Execute Order 66. No questions, no hesitation. Only obedience forged through designs the Jedi never saw. On Coruscant, in the temple that once sang with the voices of younglings and the hum of training sabers, the sky burned orange. Gunships descended upon the marble steps like carrion birds. The clones who had once marched beside the Jedi in brotherhood turned their rifles inward. The great doors were breached, and the temple became a slaughterhouse. In distant war zones, the betrayal was the same. On icy worlds, in jungles heavy with rain, on desert plains beneath merciless suns, Jedi fell, cut down, not by Sith, but by those they had trusted. Blades met blaster fire, but it was never enough. Even the most skilled masters could not defend against the tide. It was not war. It was erasure. The archives, storehouse of 10,000 years of knowledge, were the first to burn. Scrolls, holorecordings, and relics of worlds long dead turned to ash. The Emperor to-be decreed it so. History itself was rewritten in the moment of its destruction. The Jedi reduced to traitors in the eyes of the galaxy they had once served. In the shadow of the temple spires, Anakin Skywalker walked in silence, his saber alive with crimson death. There was no hesitation in his strikes, no pause to remember names or faces. The council chambers echoed with the cries of the dying, but they were drowned by the hum of his blade. In that night of fire, the boy from Tatooine was gone. Only Darth Vader remained, younglings huddled in training rooms, clutching their practice sabers, expecting rescue. When the doors opened, it was not safety that came to them. Their faith was their undoing. The holocron's voice trembles as it recalls this moment, for here, light itself seemed to scream. In the outer rim, those who survived became hunted shadows. Clones scoured every system, guided by Imperial orders, but the deadliest hunter was Vader himself. His ship descended without warning, his presence in the Force like the closing jaws of a predator. No plea reached him, no bond of old friendship softened his hand. One by one, the surviving Jedi fell. Some fought with the desperation of cornered beasts, others sought to flee into exile. A few renounced the Force entirely, hoping to vanish among the common people. But the shadow found them all in time. The galaxy felt the change, as if a star had been extinguished. Worlds where Jedi had walked now stood under martial law. Temples on distant planets were gutted and remade into imperial strongholds. Even the statues of ancient masters were toppled, their faces shattered. Sidious watched with silent satisfaction. His new apprentice, an unbreakable blade forged from loss and rage. Every death tightened his hold on the galaxy. Yet the Holo warns that such darkness carries its own decay, that the deeper it spreads, the more cracks form beneath its surface. The Purge did not simply end the Jedi, it ended an era of belief. It taught the galaxy to live without guardians, to bow without question, to accept the shadow as the natural sky. But the Force is not so easily silenced. In the ashes of the dead, seeds of resistance took root, waiting for a wind to carry them, and so the holocron whispers, light dies quickest in those who think it cannot be extinguished, but embers, though buried deep, will wait lifetimes to rise again. Chapter 11. The Fortress of Black Glass Beyond, the storms of the Mustafar system, where rivers of molten rock carve their slow, eternal scars into the planet's crust. A new citadel rose from the ashes. It was not built as a sanctuary, nor as a palace, but as a wound upon the world, a place where the air itself seemed to recoil. Its towers were jagged spires of obsidian, forged from the very volcanic stone over which Anakin Skywalker had been broken. Here Darth Vader made his dwelling. The fortress stood not merely as a home, but as a conduit. Beneath its foundations lay ancient Sith caves, their walls carved with markings older than the Republic. The heat rising through the stone carried whispers, voices too old to belong to any living being. In these depths, the Emperor's new apprentice was told to listen, to meditate not on peace, but on pain. Vader walked its darkened halls in silence. Servants and officers spoke in hushed tones, never meeting the black lenses of his mask. In the rare moments when he removed the helmet, the sound of his own breathing without the machine was a reminder of what he had lost and of what he could never regain. This was Sidious's design, to make the fortress a mirror of his apprentices. Soul, each wall a reflection of isolation, each shadow a prison bar. From this black citadel, orders spread across the stars. Bounties were placed on the heads of the last surviving Jedi. Inquisitors, twisted servants of the Empire, came and went, reporting to the Dark Lord in chambers lit only by the glow of Mustafar's fire. Each brought tales of hunts and captures, yet few returned with the satisfaction of a kill in Vader's eyes. For him, the hunt was personal. At times, the holocron murmurs, he descended into the lava caverns alone. There, kneeling before ancient Sith shrines, he sought visions of Padme visions that never came. Instead, he found only fragmented dreams, in which her voice called to him and dissolved into the hiss of molten rivers. These dreams fed his fury, and the fury fed his power, as Sidious intended. Yet even in his dominion, the shadows whispered of rebellion. Traders spoke in secret of insurgents in distant sectors. Smugglers ferried not only contraband, but messages of hope. Vader's fortress became not a deterrent, but a challenge, a symbol to strike against. And still he crushed each flame, before it could spread, drowning hope in fear. The obsidian spires caught the light of Mustafar's sun in cruel ways, bending it into red reflections that made the world seem aflame even in the day. Those brought here as prisoners, seldom left alive. Some were Jedi, dragged in chains to the depths. Others were Imperial officers who had failed in their duties, vanishing into chambers from which no sound escaped. The Emperor rarely visited. When he did, it was to remind Vader of his chains. He would speak of greater conquests, of the inevitability of their rule, of ancient Sith who had bent entire galaxies to their will. And always he would leave Vader here, alone, with the endless heat and the black stone, knowing that solitude would erode whatever remnants of Anakin remained. But the holocron speaks with a shiver. The more the fortress absorbed his rage, the more it also became a cage. In dreams, Anakin's ghost walked its halls, unseen by the Dark Lord who wore his body. Somewhere within the man of black armor, a spark waited, dormant, beneath the crushing weight of shadow and the Force itself, patient and eternal, watched through every jagged window. Chapter 12. The years of iron ruled the galaxy entered an age of fear. From the core worlds to the farthest edges of the outer rim, the banner of the Empire hung over every spaceport, every city, every world that dared breathe without permission. Star destroyers patrolled hyperspace lanes like predators, their shadows eclipsing the suns of countless systems. The Emperor's decrees reached even the smallest colonies, each one carrying the weight of absolute authority. There were no senates now, no debates, no voices raised in dissent without consequence. To resist was to vanish. Darth Vader moved through this era as the Emperor's fist. His presence was both rare and unforgettable, a visit from the dark. Lord meant death had already been decided. Governors ruled in fear of his arrival. Admirals feared the sound of his mechanical breathing in their corridors. Even those loyal to the Empire spoke his name in whispers, for the shadow of Vader was not a symbol of order but of inevitable destruction. Entire cultures were dismantled under the iron boot of Imperial control. Languages were outlawed, traditions erased, and histories rewritten to glorify the new order. Those who resisted were made examples, their leaders publicly executed or sent to the mines of Kessel, where the light of the suns never reached. Worlds rich in resources were stripped bare, their people reduced to laborers under the watch of faceless stormtroopers. The holocron tells of how Vader, in these years, rarely questioned his purpose. The fire that once burned with personal vengeance had been reshaped into something colder. Duty to the Emperor, devotion to the vision of a galaxy forged through fear. And yet, in the quiet moments between missions, there were cracks. In the hum of his meditation chamber, in the silence of deep space, he felt the faint echo of the defiance that had once defined him. He remembered standing against the Council, defying their judgment. Now he crushed that same spirit wherever it rose. In the outer rim, the first sparks of unrest began to flare. Small uprisings, barely more than riots, broke out on forgotten worlds, a shipment stolen here, an Imperial outpost sabotaged there. At first, these acts were met with swift and brutal retaliation. Cities were razed, populations scattered. Yet the more Vader stamped down on them, the more they returned. The galaxy's anger was patient, biding its time. Vader saw the pattern even when the Emperor dismissed it. Sidious, confident in his absolute power, called the rebels insignificant insects. But Vader understood something his master did not. The strength of hope, once awakened, could be more dangerous than any weapon. It was the same force that had once driven him to impossible victories in the Clone Wars. Now it worked against him. His hunts took him across dozens of systems. He descended into rebel hideouts on distant moons, chased smugglers through asteroid fields, and interrogated captured fighters in the cold, sterile chambers of Imperial strongholds. He demanded names, locations, supply lines, and when he had them, he burned them to ash. Yet each time he returned to Mustafar or Coruscant, reports of new uprisings awaited him. The Hydra of rebellion grew new heads faster than he could sever. Them, the holocron whispers that the Force itself moved in these years like a current against a great stone. The Empire was vast, yes, but even stone erodes under the steady push of water. Vader felt the pull of that current in battle, in interrogation, in the strange stubbornness of his enemies. They fought not for survival alone, but for something larger, something he had once believed in himself. The Emperor tightened his grip further, ordering the construction of weapons capable of erasing entire worlds. Fear, he believed, would drown hope once and for all. Vader oversaw some of these projects, his cold gaze ensuring they progressed without delay. But deep within, there was an unspoken recognition. Such power was not just for the galaxy. It was also meant to keep him in line. The years blurred together in the iron monotony of conquest. Each victory was hollow, each act of destruction adding to the weight Vader carried in silence. His name became legend, his figure a specter that haunted dreams. Children across the galaxy learned to fear the hiss of his breathing. And yet, somewhere in the endless black between the stars, whispers of defiance grew louder. The holocron warns that no matter how strong the tyrant's hand, the wind cannot be still forever. It will find the smallest crack in the fortress wall, the tiniest gap in the armor, and there it will flow, unseen at first, unstoppable in the end. Vader could not see the full truth of this yet, but the wind had already begun to blow. Chapter 13. The spark of rebellion. It began as a whisper. A name passed from mouth to mouth in shadowed cantinas, a coded signal hidden in merchant traffic, a smuggler's shipment that mysteriously went missing before it reached an Imperial garrison. There was no banner, no central command, just scattered individuals who refused to kneel, farmers who hid fugitives in their barns, dock workers who altered ship registries, pilots who ferried supplies under forged manifests. Alone, they were nothing. Together, they became something the Empire could not entirely see, and therefore could not entirely destroy. The Emperor mocked the notion of a rebellion. To him, the galaxy's fate was sealed. His fleets ruled the stars, his governors ruled the worlds, and Vader's shadow enforced their will. The idea that scattered insurgents could challenge this order amused him. He dismissed reports of stolen cargo and ambushed patrols as mere piracy. But Vader's view was colder. He saw the signs in the same way a soldier notices the shift in the wind before a battle. To Vader, the rebellion was not a single enemy, but a sickness, one that spread silently, carried by hope. And hope was dangerous. He had seen its power before. It could make ordinary beings attempt the impossible. It could drive armies to stand against overwhelming odds. It could turn a single act into a legend that outlived those who performed it. The Emperor underestimated this. Vader did not. He began to hunt the insurgents personally. Imperial intelligence offered him lists of suspected cells, incomplete maps of hidden bases, and intercepted communications. Most were false leads. But when the Dark Lord descended on a location, there was rarely anyone left to question afterward. In the slums of Corellia, he rooted out a cell disguised as a shipping guild. On Ryloth he broke an uprising by personally executing its leader before the eyes of the crowd. Yet, For every cell he destroyed, 2 more seemed to appear. The rebellion's strength lay not in its size, but in its nature. It was formless, leaderless, able to vanish into the crowds of 1,000 stars. A rebel could be anyone: a senator's aide, a spice runner, a deserter from the Imperial Navy. The very lack of structure made it harder to kill. The holocron speaks of these years as the birth of something inevitable. The Force itself seemed to favor the weak, guiding them through the cracks in the Empire's armor. A stolen shipment would arrive just when a rebel base was running low on food. A patrol would be called away moments before an insurgent strike. Luck, some called it. Others called it the will of the Force. Vader called it interference. Rumors began to spread of victories, small though they were. A convoy of TIE fighters destroyed above Yavin, an Imperial databank on Lothor wiped clean, the liberation of prisoners from a remote mining colony. Each story was told and retold, exaggerated until the rebels seemed invincible. The more the Empire denied these events, the more the galaxy believed them. In response, Vader unleashed a campaign of terror meant to crush morale before it could spread further. Entire villages suspected of harboring rebels were burned. Families of known insurgents were arrested and never seen again. Witnesses described him as a walking nightmare, his black armor unyielding, his lightsaber cutting through friend and foe alike. To the rebellion, he became the embodiment of the enemy, the face of the darkness they fought. Still, the spark refused to die. The Emperor grew irritated with his apprentice's obsession, urging him to focus on grander projects like the Death Star. But Vader understood the deeper threat. A weapon could destroy planets. Hope could destroy empires. And this hope was beginning to unite worlds that had nothing else in common. In the shadowed council rooms of rebel hideouts, the talk turned from survival to strategy. A few began to see the possibility, distant, almost impossible, of winning. Secret meetings were held in deep space aboard ships with scrambled transponders. New alliances formed. Smugglers ran supplies not for profit, but for a cause. Even former Imperials began to defect, bringing with them valuable intelligence. The holocron notes that Vader's pursuit of the rebels was not driven solely by loyalty to the Emperor. There was a part of him that wanted to face this defiance, to crush it with his own hands. Perhaps it was the ghost of Anakin Skywalker, drawn to worthy opponents. Perhaps it was a desire to confront the same stubborn fire that had once burned in him. Whatever the reason, he hunted them relentlessly, moving faster than Imperial bureaucracy, striking where they least expected. The rebels learned to fear the sudden silence before his arrival. The way come signals would fail, how lights would flicker just before the hiss of his breathing filled the air. But in a strange way, his presence also hardened them. They could not match his power, but they could survive him. And if they could survive the Empire's deadliest weapon, then maybe, just maybe, they could win. The chapter of whispers was ending. The scattered cells were beginning to connect, to recognize each other not as isolated fighters, but as parts of something larger. The Emperor still called them insects. Vader knew better. They were the first tremor of an earthquake. The wind was growing stronger. Chapter 14. The boy from the dunes far, from the thrones of Coruscant and the steel corridors of Imperial star destroyers. There lay a world forgotten by most star charts. A desert world of twin suns, where life clung to moisture as a treasure more precious than gold. Sandstorms swallowed whole settlements, and the wind carved the bones of ancient creatures into jagged monuments. This was Tatooine, a place where the galaxy's wars seemed like distant rumors. Yet it was here the Force had hidden the seed of the Empire's undoing. Luke Skywalker was not a name of power then. He was only a boy, working under the harsh command of his uncle, staring at the horizon with dreams far larger than his life. He did not know the weight of the bloodline he carried. He did not know that the shadow haunting the galaxy was his own father. The Force had veiled him, just as it had veiled Anakin once, keeping his destiny in the hands of time. The desert shaped him as it had shaped his father. Harshness taught patience, emptiness taught longing. Isolation bred the restless hunger for something greater. Yet unlike Anakin, Luke was not born a slave. He had freedom, though it was a freedom bounded by fear and duty. His uncle kept him close, perhaps sensing danger in the wider galaxy, perhaps obeying an unspoken promise. In the edges of the boy's life, strange figures passed. An old hermit known only as Ben Kenobi, living in the wastes, was whispered about by locals as mad or dangerous. Tusken raiders raided moisture farms under the twin suns, while Imperial patrols rarely ventured this far. Tatooine was lawless, but it was also ignored. That ignorance was the shield around the boy's fate. The holocron whispers of Luke's early days with a strange reverence, as if the Force itself was gathering breath. Every step he took in the dust was part of a path traced long before his birth. When he gazed at the stars, the galaxy gazed back, waiting. The Chosen One's sun could not be hidden forever. Change came on quiet wings, the wings of two droids carrying messages meant for another. R2-D2 and C-3PO, relics of older wars, stumbled into his life bearing a fragment of rebellion, a plea for help from Princess Leia Organa. In that message, the first cracks in his ordinary world began to form. He did not yet know the princess. He did not yet understand the Empire. But he felt the pull, like a current in the Force, beginning to draw him away from the shore. Ben Kenobi revealed himself for what he was, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Jedi Master, survivor of the Purge, and the keeper of truths buried since the fall of the Republic. In the shadows of his hut, the old man spoke of the Jedi Order, of the Clone Wars, of a weapon called the lightsaber. He placed in Luke's hands the very blade that had once belonged to Anakin Skywalker. The hum of its ignition was the first echo of destiny breaking through. The boy learned fragments of the truth, but not all. Obi-Wan told him his father was a great Jedi, betrayed and murdered by Darth Vader. The full horror of what his father had become was locked away for another time. The holocron records this as a mercy, though it was also a lie. Luke's refusal to leave Tatooine died with the smoke of his home. Returning to the farm, he found only charred remains, his aunt, an uncle slaughtered by Imperial troops searching for the droids. The safe cage of his life had been shattered. All that was left was the open desert, and the choice to follow Obi-Wan into the war. In the cantinas and docking bays of Mos Eisley, he saw the wider galaxy for the first time. Smugglers, bounty hunters, alien tongues. The air smelled of oil and blaster fire. Here, Obi-Wan secured passage aboard the Millennium Falcon, a ship captained by Han Solo and his co-pilot Chewbacca. Luke did not yet know these names would become as bound to his fate as his own. The journey off-world was more than escape. It was the first step toward the center of the storm. Imperial Star Destroyers hunted the Falcon, their massive hulls blotting out the stars. The boy from the dunes now moved under the same night sky as Darth Vader himself, though neither yet knew the other's face. The holocron describes this meeting of paths as a moment of balance shifting. The rebellion gained a soul who did not yet understand his power. The Empire gained an enemy who would not be turned aside by fear. The Force, in its unknowable design, had placed father and son on a course toward collision. Luke's days as a moisture farmer were gone. Ahead lay battles and revelations, victories and losses. He would see worlds burn, friends fall, and truths that would shake the foundations of his being. But for now, he was simply a boy, leaving home, the twin suns setting behind him, the stars opening above, and somewhere in the cold corridors of an Imperial flagship, Vader turned his gaze toward a disturbance in the Force he could not yet name. Chapter 15. The First Meeting of Father and Son. The galaxy trembled in the wake of the Death Star's destruction. The Empire had believed itself unshakable, a machine of fear and steel, bound together by the Emperor's will. But in a single battle, the rebellion had struck a wound so deep that even the farthest systems whispered of Imperial weakness. Star destroyers prowled the space lanes with renewed ferocity. Moffs barked orders with desperation hidden under their rage. The Emperor himself was silent, but in that silence was danger. Among the survivors of the battle was Darth Vader, drifting in the void after his TIE fighter had spun out of control. His ship had been damaged, but not destroyed. He had felt it, a moment unlike any he had sensed since the fall of the Jedi. The Force had flared bright and pure, a light sharp enough to pierce the darkness in which he had lived for decades. It was not the flicker of a common pilot's courage. It was a presence, strong and unyielding, in the chaos after his return to the fleet. Vader hunted for the name behind the shot that had destroyed the battle station. Intelligence reports were scattered. Some spoke of a rebel pilot in an old T-65 X-Wing, Calcine Red 5. Others whispered of a farm boy from the Outer Rim. The details were thin, but then came the name, Skywalker. It was not a common name. It was not one that could be mistaken. Hearing it was like hearing a ghost call from across the years. Vader stood in silence, the reports trembling in his hands. The Emperor had told him nothing of this. Obi-Wan's disappearance into the desert now had meaning. The boy he had fought to keep from the Emperor, the son he had never known survived, was alive, and he had destroyed the Death Star. The knowledge was a storm within him. For years, Vader had been the Emperor's blade, striking where commanded, crushing opposition without hesitation. But now his thoughts turned away from his master's will. This boy was not just a rebel, he was legacy. He was proof that Anakin Skywalker had not been entirely erased from the galaxy. Vader's mind turned to possibilities. The Emperor was powerful, but not eternal. Together, father and son could rule the galaxy, reshape it into something stronger, more ordered. The rebellion would be swept aside not by destroying the boy, but by claiming him. Blood called to blood. The bond of the Force would seal their strength. His search began in shadows. He sent probes to the far reaches of space, deploying bounty hunters and agents without revealing the true reason for his obsession. He could not trust the Emperor with this knowledge. Not yet. The boy had to be found, tested, and turned before Sidious could sink his claws into him. When at last their paths crossed, it was not in battle as Vader had imagined. It was brief, almost fleeting, a space engagement where their ships danced among the stars, and in the Force they felt each other. Luke was still raw, untrained, unaware of the depth of his connection. Yet even in that inexperience, Vader sensed the same spark that had once burned within himself. The holocron describes Vader's thoughts in those moments with an edge of fascination. This was not the cold, calculating Sith Lord the galaxy feared. This was a man who, beneath the armor, remembered what it was to dream of shaping destiny. But the boy resisted. Luke fought not only the Empire, but also the pull of the dark voice, calling to him across the void. Every attempt Vader made to draw him closer was met with defiance. Even without full training, Luke carried a will that refused to bend. He would not be tempted by vague promises of power. The rebellion had become his family, and their cause had become his anchor. Vader did not strike him down. He could have, in space, in duels, in the chaos of war, but each time he stayed his hand. The holocron claims this restraint was not weakness, but a rare kind of hope. Vader believed that the right moment, the right confrontation, would shatter the boy's resistance. The Emperor, though silent at first, began to notice the currents in the Force. He summoned Vader, speaking of a great threat, a young rebel whose power could rival their own. He commanded that the boy be brought. Before him, Vader obeyed with words, but in his heart, the command became something else. If Luke was to be brought anywhere, it would be to his side, not Sidious's throne. The chapter closes with the image of Vader standing alone in the viewport of his Star Destroyer, stars stretching endlessly before him. Somewhere in that darkness was his son, unaware of the storm gathering around him. The holocron's last line on this moment is quiet but ominous. The shadow does not always hunt to kill. Sometimes it hunts to claim. Chapter 1-6, The Duel in the Cloud's Best Pin, was a world adrift in the skies, its floating city gleaming above endless clouds. It was a place of wealth and secrecy, where deals were made in silence, and danger often hid behind polite smiles. Lando Calrissian ruled it with charm and calculation, a man who could survive in the cracks between the Empire and the underworld. But on this day, Cloud City became a stage for a trap years in the making. Vader's search for Luke had led him here. Through bounty hunters and betrayals, through whispers carried on Imperial channels, he had learned where the boy would go. The Wookiee, the princess, the Corellian smuggler, they were Luke's family in all but blood. To catch the son, the father would first capture the friends. Lando never stood a chance. The Empire had arrived before Luke, before the Falcon, before the warning could be sent. Vader stepped from the shadows into Cloud City's corridors, his presence like a weight on the air. Calrissian agreed to his terms, but fear was written in his eyes. Vader promised only that they would not be harmed, a promise he already intended to twist. When Luke's friends arrived, they were greeted with warmth that quickly turned to steel. Han Solo was taken and subjected to the agony of carbon freezing, not for his death, but as a test. If it worked on him, it would be used on Luke, Leia, and Chewbacca could do nothing but watch as Han's body was sealed in carbonite, his face frozen in a grimace of pain. The trap was set. Vader knew Luke would come. He could feel it in the Force, the boy's urgency, his determination to save the ones he loved. That very attachment, Vader believed, would be the chain that could pull him into the dark. When Luke arrived, he was not the farm boy who had destroyed the Death Star. He carried himself with more confidence, his training under Yoda giving him strength, but he was still untested against the full power of a Sith Lord. Vader stood waiting in the carbon-freezing chamber, the red glow of machinery casting deep shadows over his armor. The duel began without ceremony. Vader struck first, testing Luke's defenses, measuring his skill. Luke fought back with surprising speed, each clash of their blades echoing through the chamber. But Vader's movements were controlled, precise, more a lesson than a killing strike. He was probing for weakness, not in Luke's body, but in his resolve. The fight spilled into the corridors of Cloud City, the clash of lightsabers sparking against steel and glass. Vader drove Luke back step by step, speaking little, letting the weight of his presence push against the boy's will. He used the Force to hurl objects, testing not only Luke's skill but his composure. Luke fought bravely, but the difference in experience was vast. Every move he made, Vader anticipated. Every tactic he tried, Vader countered. In the darkened chamber high above the city, their blades locked, and Vader pressed forward with relentless strength. Then came the moment of pain. With a single, precise swing, Vader's blade cut through Luke's wrist. The boy's lightsaber, the one that had once belonged to Anakin Skywalker, fell into the abyss. Luke staggered, gasping, clutching the stump of his arm. He was cornered, his body failing, his options gone. It was then that Vader spoke the words that would change everything. "No, I am your father." The sentence fell like a hammer, breaking more than bone. Luke's mind reeled. Everything Obi-Wan had told him shattered in an instant. This was not the monster who had murdered his father. This was his father. Vader stepped closer, his voice steady, almost calm. He spoke of destiny, of overthrowing the Emperor, of ruling the galaxy together. It was an offer of power, but also of connection, the chance to no longer be alone in the galaxy. He extended his hand. Luke looked at it, blood and rain mixing. On his face, the wind howling around them. But behind Vader's words, he felt the darkness. He saw the fate that awaited him if he accepted. His answer was not in words, but in action. With one final glance, Luke turned and stepped into the void. The wind tore him away, and he fell into the endless clouds below. Vader did not reach for him. He watched. The holocron notes that for the first time in many years, the shadow felt something it did not recognize. Uncertainty. The boy had chosen death over joining him, or so it seemed. Yet Vader knew the truth of the Force. This was not the end. Luke had survived once before. He would survive again. As Luke was carried away by the winds to awaiting rescue, Vader returned to his ship. The city faded behind him, but the name Skywalker still burned in his mind. The duel had not ended in victory, but neither had it ended in defeat. The holocron closes the chapter with a single, haunting line. The hand was lost, but the game was not. Chapter 17. The Last Temptation. The Emperor's throne room was not merely a place of rule. It was a crucible, a space built for the shaping and breaking of wills. Dark stone and steel framed a wide view of space where the rebel fleet fought, desperately against the might of the Imperial Armada. Every detail was calculated, every shadow placed to magnify the Emperor's presence. Luke Skywalker was brought into this chamber not as a prisoner in chains, but as prey in a web. His hands were bound, but it was his spirit that Sidious sought to capture. The boy's arrival was no accident. It was the culmination of a design that had been in motion since the first. Whisper of his name reached the Emperor's ears. Vader stood beside his master, silent, the hum of his respirator the only sign of life beneath the armor. His gaze followed Luke, but his thoughts were layered. He had brought his son here because the Emperor demanded it. But beneath obedience, there lingered the memory of their duel on Bespin the Stubborn, defiance in Luke's eyes as he chose the fall. Sidious welcomed Luke with the mockery of politeness, his voice a silken blade. He spoke of the inevitable defeat of the rebel fleet, of the destruction of his friends. He invited Luke to look through the vast window and watch their doom unfold. Each word was a thread, drawing him closer to despair. Luke kept his composure, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. He could feel Vader's presence like a shadow at his back. He could feel the Emperor's probing touch in his mind, searching for anger, for fear, for hate, the fuel of the dark side. The Emperor's strategy was patient. He offered no direct threats at first. Instead, he painted a picture of the future. He spoke of power, of destiny, of the natural place Luke would have at his side once the old order was swept away. It was the same law he had once used on Anakin Skywalker, the same poison, sweetened with the promise of control. Vader remained silent, but his stance shifted. The Emperor's words were for Luke, yet they cut into Vader as well. He remembered being in that same position, young and full of fire, thinking he could shape the galaxy if only he had the strength. He remembered believing Sidious was the only one who could grant it. Luke's voice, when he spoke, was calm but firm. He would never join them. He was a Jedi like his father before him. The words struck Vader like a quiet blow, not for that defiance, but for the way Luke claimed him, not as Vader the Sith Lord, but as Anakin Skywalker. The Emperor's smile thinned. His tone sharpened. If persuasion could not turn the boy, provocation would. He revealed the full scale of the battle outside, how the rebels' victory was an illusion, how their fleet would soon be obliterated by the Death Star's firepower. He urged Luke to strike him down, to end his life in anger. Luke's hand trembled near his lightsaber. Vader felt it, the storm in his son's heart. The temptation was real, and that made it dangerous. When Luke finally ignited his blade, it was not the calm of a Jedi that moved him, but the desperate need to end the Emperor's reign. Vader intercepted him instantly. The duel erupted between father and son again, but this was no echo of Bespin. Luke had grown stronger, faster, more certain in his strikes. The clash of sabers rang through the throne room as the Emperor looked on with cold satisfaction. This was his design, for Luke to destroy Vader in anger, to take his place as the new apprentice. Each furious swing brought Luke closer to the edge of the abyss, and Vader could feel the darkness licking at him. They fought across the chamber, Luke's strikes growing heavier, more aggressive. Vader matched them with skill, but there was no denying his son's strength. In the final exchange, Luke's rage flared as Vader threatened Leia, and with a surge of power, he struck again and again until Vader's defenses broke. Luke's blade sliced through, severing Vader's mechanical hand. Sparks rained down as the Sith Lord fell to his knees. Luke stood over him, breathing hard, the Emperor's voice whispering in his ear, "Kill him. Take your rightful place at my side." For a heartbeat, Luke hovered at the brink, his father kneeling. Before him, unarmed, the Emperor's promises in his ears, the battle raging outside, the future waiting to be decided. And then Luke shut down his lightsaber. He threw it aside. His voice was steady. He would never turn. He was a Jedi like his father before him. The Emperor's expression hardened into something ancient and cold. Words had failed. The time for subtlety was over. Lightning erupted from his fingers, arcs of pure dark side energy striking Luke's body. The boy convulsed, crying out, the smell of ozone filling the chamber. Vader stood frozen for a breath. The Emperor's command was clear. Let the boy die. But the sight of his son, writhing under the same merciless power he had once endured, cracked something deep within him. Memories surged of Tatooine sands, of Shmi's smile, of Podme's laughter. of a promise made to protect. The choice was no longer between master and apprentice. It was between darkness and light, between what he had become and what he had once been. And in that moment, the shadow began to break. Chapter 18. The Death of the Shadow. The throne room shook with the fury of the battle outside. But within its walls, the greater war was happening in silence. A war inside the heart of a man who had been called Darth Vader for decades. Luke lay on the ground, his body arched, under the searing assault of the Emperor's Force lightning. His cries cut through the mechanical rhythm of Vader's breathing, each one driving a spike into the darkness that had long encased him. The Emperor's face was twisted with glee. His hands poured death without hesitation, each bolt a reminder of his absolute power. To Sidious, this was not merely execution. It was a lesson, the final proof that mercy was weakness, that love was a chain to be broken. He had taught it to Anakin long ago, and now he would carve it into Anakin's son. Vader stood between them. But for the first time in many years, he was not sure where he belonged. The boy's pain was a mirror to a night-long past, when his own body had burned on the black sands of Mustafar, his skin scorched, his breath stolen. He remembered Sidious then, too, standing above him, promising salvation, binding him to a life of servitude. He looked at Luke and saw not just a son, but a choice. He could turn away, as he had once turned away from Mace Windu's plea. He could watch the Emperor destroy this last light in his life and remain the servant he had become. Or he could act, knowing it would cost him everything. The Emperor's voice rose over Luke's screams, commanding Vader without words. This was the way of the Sith. The weak fall, the strong endure. Vader had believed it once, but strength had never been the absence of compassion. It had been the courage to protect. What mattered, a truth buried under years of lies. Luke's voice broke through the lightning. "Father, please." The word was not a title of duty. It was a call, raw and desperate. It pierced the mask, the armor, the years. Something shifted. The darkness faltered. The memory of Podmeth's last words, "There is still good in him," rose from the depths where he had buried it. He had denied it for so long, but here it was, undeniable. Vader moved. It was not slow, not hesitant. It was the movement of a man who had already decided. He turned toward the Emperor, stepping into the arcs of lightning that still lashed at Luke. The energy burned through his armor, shorting circuits, searing flesh. But he did not stop. Sidious saw it too late. His expression shifted from triumph to shock as Vader's gloved hands clamped around him. The lightning turned wild, striking walls and ceiling, setting the air alive with the stench of ozone and scorched metal. Vader lifted him from the ground with a strength born not of the dark side, but of love long denied. The Emperor's screams were shrill and inhuman. His lightning tore into Vader at point-blank range, burning deep into muscle and bone. Systems failed inside the suit, hydraulics locking, respirators sputtering, but Vader held on. Step by step, he carried Sidious to the edge of the great reactor shaft that yawned in the center of the room. With a final surge, Vader hurled him into the abyss. The Emperor fell, his lightning twisting upward in a final display of chaos before disappearing into the depths. The throne room fell silent except for Vader's ragged failing breaths. The act had cost him more than he had to give. His armor was a ruin, smoke rising from cracks in its plates. His body felt distant, heavy. Each breath was a battle, but there was no regret. The chains were broken. Luke scrambled to his father's side, ignoring the pain still echoing in his body. He reached for him, calling his name. Vader sank to his knees, the strength gone from his limbs. The black mask that had been his face for so long turned toward Luke. "Help me take this mask off," Vader said, his voice rasping even through the vocoder. Luke shook his head. "But you'll die." "Nothing can stop that now," Vader replied. "Just for once, let me look on you with my own eyes." Luke hesitated only a moment before reaching for the controls. The locks released with a hiss, and the mask came free. Beneath it was not the monster the galaxy feared, but the pale, scarred face of a man who had carried too much for too long. His eyes, though tired, were clear, no longer clouded by the shadow of the dark side. Luke looked at him and saw, not Vader, but Anakin Skywalker. For the first time, father and son saw each other without masks, without lies. "You were right," Anakin whispered. "You were right about me. Tell your sister, you were right." His voice faltered, but there was peace in it. Luke's eyes burned with tears, but he smiled. "I won't leave you here." "You already have," Anakin said, a faint smile touching his lips. The strength left his body, and with it, the last breath of Darth Vader. In his place remained only Anakin Skywalker. Redeemed, the holocron's glow dimmed as if in acknowledgement. Its final whisper was soft, fading into silence. "The chosen one is not the one who conquers, but the one who ends." Luke held his father for a long moment before rising. Outside, the Death Star shuddered as the rebel fleet dealt its final blow. The throne room burned, the Empire's symbol reduced to ruin. But in Luke's heart, there was no triumph, only the quiet weight of loss and the fragile hope of renewal. Anakin's body would be carried away, given to the fire. The galaxy would know Darth Vader had fallen. Few would know Anakin Skywalker had returned. But for Luke, that was enough. Far away in the vast currents of the Force, the shadow that had lingered for so long was gone. The man who had once been lost had found his way home.